I go by Making Markets. I helped lead the community management effort at Constitution DAO. I'm joined here by.
I am Above Average Joe. You can find me in the Bankless Discord most of the time. I have been part of that community since its launch, and it is my home.
Okay, my name is Wartel. I'm a community lead at Olympus. And yeah, excited to talk about DAOs in general, how they work at Olympus, but also at other places, and just have a nice chat, right?
Yeah, I think that when we look at the evolution of DAOs, a lot of people are concerned with centralization in what we see as the leadership. And I find that in the case of something like Bankless DAO, which was launched fairly by Bankless LLC, they stepped away probably due to securities regulations and the risks therein. So our community, which had been built for the last 2.5 years by the newsletter, had a sudden coordination mechanism, but there was no real leadership to go with it. So it was a true open process. And in a situation like that, leadership became driven by initiative. We had a focus towards onboarding a billion users to cryptocurrency. And from that, we were able to organize around a base set of mission, vision, and values. And coordinating around that, it was then a case of initiative first. And those who stepped up wound up taking the roles of responsibility, which is different than a role of power because you're executing upon the will of the organization rather than imposing your will upon the organization. And I think that is one of the core essences of what a DAO really is. That it's open to anybody to contribute, but it is those who want to step up because they have skin in the game or they have an idealistic match to the goals of the organization as a whole. That cultural tie becomes the driving factor behind what is making these people who they are today.
And I think that's a very important point where DAOs are very different from traditional companies. Where in a DAO, I think more and more you see people and community members with great ideas that you don't have to lead, right? You have to steward, as we said backstage, right? I think just having some really amazing talent, especially also, for example, in Olympus, we see a lot of people coming in with great ideas. And then for me, I think it's then the case where you not have to say, okay, now do this, 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 and this. But they come to you, they say, I need these amount of resources. I want to execute on this great idea. And then you help them execute on that vision. And I think that's really the key of a DAO leadership or DAO stewardship, as opposed to what you have now at, for example, more centralized entities.
Yeah, I mean, I think I would also say though that it also kind of depends on the context. So, in the case with Constitution DAO, it was what, a 10 to 14-day blitz to raise a ton of capital, to the tune of 40 million plus, interface with old guard institutions like Sotheby's, Christie's, whatever other legal entities that we had to, that probably have no idea about any of the intricacies of crypto. And so how do you do that in such a short time period? And so, not to sound overly contrarian or anything, but, the most efficient way to be able to pull all those levers at once and successfully execute, it required some level of centralization, but we still had the spirit of, being, maintaining the most transparency we possibly could with the community, so people got real-time updates, understood exactly what was going on to the full extent that was feasibly possible. But I guess that's why context is a bit important in that regard, because for a very short mission critical time frame, the dynamic kind of fundamentally has to change.
I definitely agree with that. And I see in things like the evolution of Bankless DAO a continual governance process of scaling, because what works for a group of 60 doesn't necessarily work for a group of 300. And whenever you have a rapid expansion of that user base, the culture that sustained a group of 60 that may also sustain a group of 600 needs to be propagated throughout those sorts of areas in order to really maintain alignment on a decentralized purpose. Without that sort of focus propagating in the community, the total amount of energy that can be harvested goes down. And that means that you can have a highly potent system, but you're not able to harvest that energy as it's being expended. And being able to capture that energy and feed it back into the system in a recursive group of growth is what tends to create the most value overall. I think that was what one of the main things Alex was trying to get at earlier is the velocity of money and that adding value from one hand to the next and the culture that comes with that is the place where there is new wealth generated. It is the reality of creating new value because we've added new efficiencies to the system, and that comes through the success of our coordination.
Isn't that also where a DAO differentiates itself from a community, where a DAO works more towards a common goal, and a community more or less always has a financial part to it as well. I feel in DeFi at least, where the community wants to see the token and number go up, but the DAO is really going towards the goal that you set as also that steward that you are, in a way like, hey, these are the values that we want to live by, these are the products that we want to push out, this is how we want to welcome people in our DAO as well. And I think sometimes people also don't have that difference clear enough in their community, even where then everyone thinks they're part of the DAO, but they don't really contribute to the DAO in a way that's actually efficient in resources, for example.
I mean, to that point, like you mentioned earlier, what applies for a group of 5 people will not apply to our Discord was about 20,000 plus users. And so what I found was we had to start thinking at the population level. Like the concept of culture like very rapidly changed to, a lot of random faces. Obviously, we would see some of the same users contributing their inputs and, and being very engaged with the community. But, after a certain tipping point, I don't know what number that would be, maybe 5,000 users, 10,000, I don't know. But you got to start thinking about the population level. And so one of the ramifications of that is you kind of have to solve for the lowest common denominator, if you will, because when you're dealing with that many number of people, there are going to be a lot of people who aren't quite sophisticated in all aspects of community building, whatever initiatives you have. And so I think I was mentioning this to you guys earlier, but, the Constitution, it had a floor price of $20 million, right? And it was an auction format. And so, we noted that on the website. When we hit the $20 million mark, a lot of people in the server, they're like, wait, why are you guys still taking money? This makes no sense. It's just a scam. A lot of people would start saying it was a scam. And the thing is that fundamentally they did not understand how auctions worked. It was a surprising number of people. I figure most everyone here knows how an auction works. And so 20 million is merely the minimum that we needed, right? And who are our competitors? Turns out Ken Griffin, but probably people who just sneeze at a check of $100 million, right? So to have any realistic shot, we needed far more than 20 million. And so being able to communicate that clearly to people who might, I guess, who did not understand how auctions work in the first place, and being able to calm the community down, or like at least get them on the same page and have some level of understanding of what the initiative is and how you get there. That's certainly something that I was not expecting, and that's what I mean by you got to think about like the population level type stuff, as it relates to managing community of a certain scale.
Yeah, and it's also because you guys had to basically build a community in 10 days.
Yeah.
For your goal was literally this 10 days, and then like we see what happens.
Yeah.
Where I think, especially you guys have been building for years. We for now 9 months, I think. It's a much different approach that you then have to to a DAO and to like governing body as well.
Yeah.
Yeah. And I think that there is a lot to be said for the unique areas that our DAOs optimize, because not every culture has to be the same in order for a DAO to work. They are a lot more like a biological organism. The unique things that make those DAOs what they are don't have to apply to every situation because it's not going to be the same equation they're working to solve. Like Olympus DAO, I see as the game theory DAO. You guys optimize for the best social outcome scenario, and then that is what drives what you guys choose to do as an organization. And that becomes a great organizational mechanism because it harnesses the self interest and says this is the way we can maximize that self-interest for everybody that's among us, and that leads to really expansive growth. And so I think you guys have a sky's the limit type setup. And then over here at Constitution DAO, I saw a flash mob kind of mentality that takes the mimetics of what our space can do, and it really showcased here is how we can capture that energy overnight. But then the retention wasn't necessarily there, and that's something that Bankless DAO tends to focus on a lot because we are a media organization by nature. We don't have the same protocol to organize us. We are much more in depth with that human element, and that means dealing with things like human conflicts among members and figuring out what it takes to interact with this organization on a non-technical level. Most of our participants are people in legal areas or in design or even in analytics or sound. Um, and so we are testing the limits of what a DAO can be, not just on a protocol level, but on a societally organized level. And if there is even a mild amount of advancement in what DAOs as a collective bring to society, that is going to be an organizational shift that is an order of magnitude growth potential, because it's like putting an assembly line on the culture and societal values that we organize our system of humanity by.
You said we focus on retention. Do you then mean you focus on keeping your contributors contributing to Bankless, or how should I interpret that?
Yeah, so if you've got people that are working with the organization, they're going to need to be fed. They've got bills to pay. And that sort of meets the ground need is the equivalent of the nutrients that feed a plant. And you need to have a way to get those nutrients to the parts of the plant that use those nutrients so that they can do their job and then provide more overall growth to this structure that is the entire organism.
But isn't a nice thing also with a DAO that it's fluid in nature, where, for example, you can contribute for 2 months straight in a very meaningful way, and then you see something new that's interesting, or the purpose of the DAO changes. For example, with you guys, right?
Yeah.
The purpose was first we buy the constitution, and now you have shifted and pivoted to a new ideal. So I think that's also the nice thing. And if that plant doesn't find the nutrients in this one place, it can migrate to another place and then find nutrients there and maybe even come back over time, right?
Yeah, it taps into like a mycelial network and it takes those things that are locked up and makes it bioavailable. That's why we see things like the recursions of liquidity in the yield farming craze, because stacking those nutrients back into the places where they do the most good for what that protocol needs are where the systems are creating new efficiencies. And the revolution that Olympus DAO has with their bonding is a sort of energy capture mechanism. So the way that you guys incentivize liquidity for other protocols to own their own liquidity setup, instead of a yield farm where they're renting that liquidity and as soon as the money dries up, they blow away, the protocol purchases this service for themselves and it creates a base level sustainability because they have stored that energy for the time when it's needed the most, which is the bear market.
So you mentioned the concept of fluidity, right? And the cool thing is that it kind of happens at both of the micro and macro levels. And what I mean by that is like, let's talk about like the marketing work stream for whatever DAO, right? Now it's probably like what I've seen at least, it's not just one person running the show. Sure, they're going to be like the main contributor for, 18 hours or something. And then it just like fluid, it kind of just transitions to another contributor who's pivoting off of that idea and just driving the mission forward. And you also see that at the high level for each of the mission values, mission statements of the overall DAO as well. But I'm sure you guys have seen like every other person on Twitter, they're creating a DAO these days, and at the end of the day, it's all group chats basically. So what do you think DAOs are going to look like in 5 years from now?
My idea there is a bit different. I think that there will be more people that will start forming teams and contributing to DAOs, or like sort of the government rights, like an RFP, and then teams will say, okay, I want to do this. I want to be your marketing team, and they like self-organize in their own little DAOs. I think that will be maybe even a more efficient way than just every protocol has like its own marketing team, and every protocol has its own its own, for example, Olympus policy. But there are so many policy teams popping up now everywhere. So I think that makes much more sense, where you have these people that contribute into multiple places in a meaningful way, which then also has this network effect, which is very efficient as opposed to traditional companies where you are sat at your desk for 40 hours a week, just doing the same job for the same company, which is not efficient in my opinion.
Yeah, I think that what we're going to see is the evolution away from the corporate structure, because the DAOs optimize for the individual, both for skills and passions. And by unlocking the ability for the passion to be tapped into with an organization, there is an element of voluntarism that is introduced. It takes our mindset from that which was designed to create great assembly line workers, and it says we're going to automate everything that we can automate, because that's where we get the freedom to put our energy where it is most fulfilling. And by creating a fulfilling environment for our members, we are developing a world where the nutrients that nourish our psychology as well as our physiology are met in our organizational structures of tomorrow. So I think it's going to eventually pervade and replace the modern corporate system to a degree where they are indistinguishably different.
Well,
And that's not to say that DAOs are perfect right now. I think a lot of people that participate in a DAO know that this is still early, because it's like democracy, right?
Yeah.
It's the worst form of government except all others. So
Yeah.
I mean, that's also with DAOs. I think DAOs are in IT very, very good, right? It's something where we should go towards, but it's still in its infancy, and we need to keep on working to make it better and better every single day, because there's so many things to figure out still, I find.
I mean, because it's so, dynamic and fluid like that, one of the tough things is that most DAOs operate on a volunteer basis, right? And so even if it's an amazing idea, the first 5 days, the community is going to be excited, they're going to be pitching in, but then how do you keep that momentum? How do you build a self-sustaining community? And that's one of the incredibly hard things to do. And that's not, I don't know that it's necessarily a concept specific to DAOs, but how do you keep people incentivized? We're incentivized by corporations because they pay us our salary. But when there's no obvious motivation like that, so people in comprising the each individual community in whichever DAO, they just have to really believe in the mission and want to keep driving it forward.
Yeah, it's all about the culture. When culture is something that drives you forward, the altruism of the act can be the reward for itself. And when your base needs are met in Maslow's hierarchy, then you're able to put your energy into these areas. And I think that concepts like systems design, which I reference permaculture an awful lot for the things that we brought to Bankless DAO, those sorts of design aspects, when incorporated into the base layer of how that culture is assembled, create a natural path to sustainability, because it says as long as it checks these boxes, that makes sure it is a net value add, we can integrate it into the system, and then it's just a matter of returning the surplus to increase the resilience and robustness.
But then how do you maintain, that sort of culture as you scale? When you look at like Axie Infinity, for example, their Discord is what, 500,000 people, something like that. And arguably it's run very much like a corporation, And so how do you kind of like, and again, we're all very early days in this, right? No, I don't know that anyone's like truly scaled successfully and also maintained the base culture that they espoused when it was just 500, 1,000 people. I think I don't want to say that the evolution towards a more corporate type culture is natural, but we tend to see that over and over again once we hit some tipping point, whether, I don't know how many people, but you keep seeing that over and over again, right?
Yeah, I think that's the difference between a community and a DAO. For example, at Olympus, we have almost 70K people in our Discords, but our DAO Discord, which is a separate Discord, is actually 2K people, and only 130 people of that actively contribute. Only like 130 people is quite big, like it's already a medium-sized organization. But they get paid and they get comped for that. So I think not everyone should be part of your DAO. Not everyone should be contributing, or like you should expect to contribute. But I think also there it's a bit of a challenge of how do you onboard people, how do you make it open, but not too open that, for example, your lead dev has to teach someone who wants to learn Solidity how to do something while he has to code something that is quite important, right, Jeff? So I mean, that's the thing where you can then instill that culture to stick around even if a bear market comes, because now it's just up only, or like it's stagnating a bit. But when a bear market comes, a lot of them will leave if you just think your DAO is your community. But your DAO of these people that you have instilled these values in, that's something else. And yeah.
No, I mean, I agree with that approach, but that also implies that some level of centralization is kind of required, right? To keep things moving, keep things efficient, keep driving towards that end game that you defined from day one.
Yeah, and that distinction is that the centralization is located in places of responsibility, not places of authority. The authority resides with the organization as a whole, and it is the execution that happens centralized because there has to be somebody to do the work until it's automated. I think that when we are looking at the questions of scaling, that the corporate structure addresses that in a way that when we're throwing out the things that are broken about the corporate system, that is throwing out the baby with the bathwater if we don't take the lessons that have already been established from thousands of years of coordination that culminate into the things they understand about scaling. And the thing is, you've got to be conscientious about whether or not the aspects they use follow that sort of cycle of systems design and are the appropriate elements to be integrated. If you're able to parse that information, then you'll get the best of both worlds.
I don't know. It's a constant evolution. Again, we're early days, right? How long have DAOs even existed, really? Or like, I guess the term, a year, 2 years, a couple years?
Ours launched 7 months ago. So yeah, it is in its early infancy. It hasn't even cut teeth yet.
Yeah. I don't know. I mean, thinking about the scaling concept, like just sometimes I wonder, like if in 5 years, DAOs are going to like kind of end up looking more and more like corporations than we would like to admit. We don't know, right? It's all up in the air. Who knows? Who knows how the landscape's going to look?
And it also depends on tooling, right? So I think running a DAO is very hard if you have to, for example, pay people. How do you pay people as a DAO? Do you want them to give them your address? But that's also a bit like people don't really want that. How do you deal with that? How do you determine if someone worked quite hard because they sit just on the other end of the world and you don't know how much hours they put in, or what is the quality of their work, or you should review it every single time. So that's also something. How do you onboard people in an efficient way? That's also with like you don't know the person, what what is his background and so on. So there, I think the tooling can really help DAOs in getting this view of how an organization should be put together. But it isn't there yet. For example, at Olympus, we paid people for a long time using the tipbot, tipcc on Discord. Like that's ridiculous if you think about it, but there wasn't really a good solution out there to do it in a trustless way as well. Now we have it, but I think, yeah, there's just so many gaps still that need to be filled. That is quite exciting that it's already working to this degree quite well. So I'm quite excited to see what the future holds if this tooling comes in place to help these organizations that we're building.
I mean, that, the concept of trust, it's a recurring theme across all of crypto, right? Like you said, half the people in Discord, they prefer to be anonymous, completely anonymous. And so, if they want to contribute to effort X, software engineering, for example, they don't want to give you their credentials or whatever, or keep it very high level. You just got to kind of take the plunge, it's kind of based on a gut feeling. But you see that everywhere in crypto, right? I mean, the entire point of the blockchain having a publicly available ledger that displaces the middleman, because I don't need to go into JP Morgan Chase and be like, well, you person behind the counter, I trust you because you're the one with the computer and what you tell me is in my checking account. I just trust the brand name. Now we don't have to do that because everything's publicly verifiable, right? So
and there as well, I think the previous speaker made a good point that these off-ramps are also quite important, the regulatory aspect around it. If today I have to explain to someone that I work for a DAO and I get paid by a DAO, for example, how does it work from a tax perspective? How does it work from just with my bank that I have to say, okay, this is the money and where it comes from, and I'm getting this money airdropped every single month for my work that is being done, as my instance, a turtle on the internet. Like, that's ridiculous to explain to like a lawyer or someone who is not acknowledged with the industry. So even these hurdles are something that we need to look at, and I think also you guys are doing this more and more. But it's very, very hard, at least to combat that.
It very much is, and I think a lot of that is because the regulatory frameworks that exist are calibrated for a world that doesn't work the way ours does today. And the new coordination mechanisms that we have in place have changed the paradigm that we operate under. And that framework is unique enough that I think that a new system is required to quantify exactly what is beneficial and what isn't in the space. Like, this is a little bit of a dig, but the SEC has protected me from more money than any other place in the world has paid me to date. And so thank you guys so much for saving me from hundreds of thousands of dollars that could have been mine because it might have been a scam. So when we're looking at something that does that, it could have empowered an individual, but it didn't. And that shows a shortfall in what legal frameworks are there to support us. And they're not going to understand what we should be regulating that like to foster that sort of growth unless we're interacting with those regulators and highlighting exactly what our innovations are. And that's one of the things that Bankless DAO's Legal Guild does a lot of interfacing on. We get lawyers from all over the world, all different jurisdictions. And from that, they're having deep conversations about exactly what existential differences are between a globally distributed organization and a company that has a registered location of business and IP worries and things like that. And charting this new territory is something that coordinating with those regulators is a key for.
Well, what do you think the timeline's going to be like that? Because a lot of these regulators, they're not crypto natives at all. They don't really understand it. And so what do you think is the timeline to have like some level of an accepted regulatory framework across major jurisdictions that still foster the empowerment and the innovation, the DAOs that we expect from DAOs,
I don't think there's a good answer for a timeline because if you give a number, you're going to set something relatively arbitrary. I think doing it right is better than doing it fast when you're talking about something that has ramifications for potentially generations.
Yeah,
exactly. And talking about timeline, I think our time is a bit up here, right? Yeah. So yeah, thank you for this.
Cool. Thank you guys, and thank you everyone today.
Thank you everyone.